And to finish us off tonight, we have not necessarily a classic movie, because I don't generally hear that many people speaking about this one, but 1981 movie titled Eyes of a Stranger, which has a pretty early appearance of Jennifer Jason Leigh, who was also laid in The Hitcher, if you happen to know her. Plot is mildly simple. This reporter, female reporter, who is trying to discover the identity of a local serial killer who is terrorizing the Miami, Florida area. And she suspects this seemingly suspicious guy who lives in a high-rise building across from hers, and throughout the movie she tries to discover, hey, is it this guy? And, well, I mean, if you've seen the movie, you know what happens, but it gets pretty tense toward the conclusion once the serial killer finds out that he's being looked into. And there's also somewhat of a side character who is both, is she blind and also unable to hear, very recall. So a character who's very vulnerable, and there's a lot of great scenes with the serial killer terrorizing this character also. A lot of the movie feels a lot more like a thriller or maybe suspense movie than it does rather horror. It is a slasher movie, but a lot of the death scenes aren't necessarily as over the top as you might expect from a movie like, let's say, Friday the 13th, or pretty much any other slasher from the early 80s, be it Sleepaway Camp, The Burning, pretty much any of those. Eyes of a Stranger has a little more of a, in my opinion, has a little more of a classy feel to it, which might not necessarily make it a bad movie, but I do think it did really well with the suspense. So even though some of the death scenes might have been somewhat disappointing, there was, in my opinion, some pretty solid suspense, and it helps that majority, in my opinion, the majority of the main actors were pretty okay.
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird one for me, because like you said, it kind of starts out like a slasher movie, then it transitions into more of a thriller, because we see the identity of the killer kind of halfway through the movie. So it loses that who is it aspect, and then it goes into the actual serial killer being more or less stalked by this newswoman.
Which I actually thought that was sort of an interesting turn of events. I don't see that very often, so I sort of like that.
The way the movie started was really well. I think the most memorable death scene in the movie was that one at the beginning.
Yes.
The head in the fish tank. It definitely got things started out on a high point. And it does have a few other decent kills in the movie. The newswoman, I didn't really care too much for her character, to be honest.
She did get in my opinion, she got quite annoying at times.
Part of that is probably because she starts out just interrupting her co-anchor or whatever it is on her news program, and I guess she gets introduced as a bit of an annoying person at that point. She, as the movie goes along, you tend to accept her for what she is. I didn't necessarily enjoy some of the scenes between the kills and the serial killer scenes. Those scenes fell flat for me. The earlier slasher type sequences, they were good. I think towards the end, where it got more suspenseful and creepy towards the end, where the guy's in the apartment, that was definitely a lot better.
Yeah, I would say I really enjoyed Jennifer Jason Leigh's performance here, because it seems to me that'd be a very, very difficult role to, you might not even know how to start with something like that. Trying to play a character who can't see and can't hear. I thought she did a really good job, despite not doing that much until the end, but like you said, during the end of the movie when things really pick up, I don't know, maybe final 15 minutes or so, I thought those were actually really, really enjoyable. Not necessarily as classic as the final 15 minutes of, say Halloween, even Friday the 13th, but for, a more low-key thriller-ish movie, I'd say the final 50 minutes of this one is really enjoyable.
And this movie is surprisingly more violent than I was expecting it to be. And I did read that a lot of places it was obviously censored. I did read that the Australian VHS was actually fully uncut, while most other places had censored versions. So it was kind of surprising, because censorship, I wouldn't say Australia's more prominent with it over some other places, but usually we're not the first to get like an uncut version of something.
Out of interest, Chucky, did you know much about this movie before seeing it, or was it just one of those movies that was more like under the radar type thing?
I definitely heard of it and seen the poster before. I just never really hear people talk about it, and I've never really come across it at a time where I felt like watching a movie. It's definitely something that's flown under the radar. I was quite surprised with how violent some of those scenes were, especially that first scene. That really got things started on the right track for me. Yeah, just all those scenes in between. I didn't care too much about the news anchor lady and her relationships, and some of the scenes where she's sneaking around the apartments and things like that were okay.
I do think that scene in which she is breaking into the apartment of the individual she suspects is the killer, I think that scene is... I think that scene's pretty suspenseful. Especially how she escapes by dropping down the balcony. I sort of had fun with that because that's the type of, oh my god, is she going to get caught? What's going to happen? I sort of enjoyed that. I sort of wish the movie had a few more suspenseful scenes. Most of the suspense we got was from women who we had no idea who they were, and it just gets talked and killed. And most of the kills, like you said, they're not necessarily amazing. They're not necessarily terrible. They're just nothing noteworthy. Overall, I think I probably enjoyed this more than you, but it's not one of those movies in which I suspect you'd want to watch, 3, 4, 5 times every other year.
The quality of a movie definitely plays into my enjoyment of it. And by quality, I mean the actual quality of the picture, the transfer itself. And I didn't watch a great quality version of it, and perhaps if I had seen it again in a much higher quality presentation, perhaps I may have slightly enjoyed it a little more. I can't say for certain.
Yeah, I was somewhat lucky in that regard. This actually played on an American TV station that generally TCM, which plays a lot of more classic movies, so even playing something from the early 80s is a bit out of place for them. So I saw a decent quality version of this. Unlike Chucky, a lot of times quality doesn't necessarily mean much to me. If you've seen some of the stuff that I watch, I think you would understand. Because I have seen some mildly atrocious copies of some movies. But yeah, I can imagine a slightly higher enjoyment, but I suspect it probably wouldn't be that much more. And even though some of the scenes in this movie are really enjoyable, like I said, the conclusion is, in my opinion, not even is it enjoyable, but I think it's also somewhat emotional. But that might just be me because I just really enjoy Jennifer Jason Leigh's character. So that conclusion with what happened to the character, I really liked that. And even though wasn't the biggest fan of the main character, the reporter, I thought the relationship between those two was somewhat heartwarming, especially given the traumatic flashback we saw of what caused the problems with the sister. So I don't know. It's one of those movies in which I think a lot of slasher fans might have expected more from. I do think though it's a lot more stylish and maybe a little more sophisticated may not be the right word, but it's a little more classy than some of the other just movies that would go in more of a gore. So this has a little more, in my opinion, feeling to it. I gave it a significantly high rating, probably around 8.5 out of 10.
Yeah, it starts off well. It's got some really cool kill scenes in it, and it does transition itself to a thriller, which I don't mind the transition. It's just the kill scenes that you get at the start, they don't follow through all the way to the end with it. It does have quite a good suspenseful ending. I just found myself falling in and out of enjoyment with it. I'm kind of juggling between a 6 or a 7 out of 10. Even right now, I really don't know what I want to give it. I'm still in my mind, I'm juggling between a 6 and a 7. I think I'm going to just rest with a 6 for now. Yeah, I'm going to stick with a 6 for now. Maybe if I watch it again, like in a higher quality Blu-ray or something like that, maybe that will tip it over the edge for a 7.
I do think, though, it's a movie I definitely would. If you're a fan of slashes, definitely might be worth checking out. You might not love it, but I do think there's enough in it to at least keep you somewhat engaged. And like we said, I don't hear many people speaking about this one. I mean, it actually has an okay rating on IMDb. Generally, for horror movies, at least it has over a 5. So to me, that's a for a horror movie that seems like an okay rating. So I think people who see it generally somewhat enjoy it. So if it sounds like it's your type of thing, I wouldn't necessarily avoid it.